At the end of that receiver is typically a little piece, we call it a wax guard. It does exactly what it sounds like it does. It keeps the wax from getting in.
You stole my moment. I was going to say, I'll bet it guards against wax. That's the only thing that I'm able to actually add to this conversation is when something is broken down in the most literal sense, even I, Kevin, can understand what it does.
Welcome to the Ask an Audiologist podcast, real audiology white papers written by real audiologists and explained to you by a real audiologist and a guy who isn't. Now here are your hosts, Dr. Ali Tressiter and Kevin Ziener.
Hello and welcome back to yet another installment of Ask an Audiologist. I'm Kevin Ziener.
And I'm Dr. Ali Tressiter.
And this is the Ask an Audiologist podcast. Today our conversation is going to take us back up to the 49th state, Alaska, as Dr. Emily McMahon from Alaska Hearing and Tinnitus Center spurred us on with her article about hearing aid parts. Though small, hearing aids can be a very complicated and intricate technology, and there is no one better to talk about that with us than our very own Dr. Ali. Dr. Ali, take it away.
Sure. So hearing aids. There are different types. So you've seen the ones that go behind the ears. You've seen the ones that are custom go in the ears. But regardless of the type of hearing aid, they all really have the same components, namely microphones, picking up the sound around you, right? A processor, something that takes that signal and makes sense of it. And then a receiver, the piece that actually puts that sound into the ear. Those are the three basic parts of a hearing aid.
So knowing that there's those three components, I know a lot of people see hearing aids and say, well, hey, there's ones that go in your ear and they're almost invisible. And then there's ones that hook around your ear. With the different appearance, what technology, what components exist in either of those options, and how are they unique to the individual?
Sure. So let's start with how they're unique to the individual. So whether you have a hearing aid that goes in the ear or a hearing aid that goes behind the ear, it's usually dependent on the type of hearing loss and the severity of hearing loss that a patient has. Hearing aids are not a one-size-fits-all. Custom hearing aids may not work for some. Behind the ear hearing aids may not work for others. Now, the most popular type of hearing aid now is what's called a receiver in the canal, part of the behind the ear or BTE category. And with that, there's that piece that goes behind the ear. Then there's a small wire and a receiver attached to it, and that receiver goes in the ear. At the end of that receiver is typically a little piece, we call it a wax guard. It does exactly what it sounds like it does. It keeps the wax from getting in.
You stole my moment. I was going to say, I'll bet it guards against wax. That's the only thing that I'm able to actually add to this conversation is when something is broken down in the most literal sense, even I, Kevin, can understand what it does.
Your brilliance
Thank
is
you.
Amazing.
And
wow.
Hearing aids help you aid in hearing.
Wow.
Thank you.
You don't even need me.
Well, nope, that's where it begins and ends for me. If you want to pick up at any other point so that my smartness can now end right now, I would appreciate it.
Sure. So very similar to the receiver in the canal, a custom hearing aid, a piece that goes all the way in your ear that usually also has a wax trap on it that does
trap wax.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yes.
I know three things about hearing aids. I know what hearing aids are, I know what wax guards are, and I know what the other thing is.
What else do you need to know?
Exactly. That's I nailed it. I nailed the first year of AUD school right there. So and when we think about different hearing aids and the different components of it, one of the things that I've learned about is both batteries and rechargeable, right? Mm-hmm. So in my brain, being a millennial, I think to myself, well, I know Apple products, I know Sony products, and all of those are rechargeable. Nobody ever asks me to replace the battery. So what's the difference in a hearing aid that has a battery or that is rechargeable, and how is that dependent on the patient?
Great question. So a lot of times the actual hearing aid itself in how it processes sound isn't necessarily all that different. Usually it really is just the battery piece that's different. And so rechargeables, they're convenient in the same way that you charge your phone every night. You can take your hearing aids out, put them on the charger. It's very routine. What's really nice about it is there's no small pieces to deal with. So if you have, a neuropathy or anything with your hands, you have trouble with dexterity, it's much easier to charge the batteries. If we have a traditional battery, one of the benefits of a traditional battery is that, say you went traveling, if you went to Thailand for 2 weeks and you forgot your hearing aid charger, the benefit to traditional batteries are, that's okay. You can buy hearing aid batteries in just about every country, pop them in, and you're good to go. If you forget your charger, you can be out of luck.
That makes sense. That I guess I just never understood in 2023 now why batteries would be a necessity, but that makes a ton of sense. If you've forgotten your charger, if you're on a trip, if you're away from your home, having batteries that are able to be intertwined, interlaced, pulled out, put back in,
For sure.
Certainly help anybody with that. So here's a question about some of the parts. What, in your opinion, in your experience as an audiologist, is the one component that always gets somebody where you're just like, it's so small, it's difficult, or finagling it is hard, or it gets stuck? Like, what is the one piece of a hearing aid where you're like, this will be the thing that always gives somebody a problem?
We're coming back full circle
Yes.
to the wax straps.
Okay, love it.
So I would say 9 times out of 10, when a patient comes in to see me and they say, my hearing aid sounds really muffled or it sounds dead, even though I'm turning it on, it's charged, 9 times out of 10, it's because that wax trap has wax in it.
Got it.
Yep.
And that's probably an element where a doctor says, hey, amongst all this crazy new stuff that you're learning, we need you to understand what this wax trap does, right? It protects the technology, it traps the wax, it makes sure that nothing is going to get in where it's not supposed to go. And so when you remove that wax trap, do you clean it or do you toss it and just replace it with something new?
You toss it and you replace it with a new one.
And I was going to say, and I imagine a lot of people forget that intricate component, which is because we all think like, hey, they're similar to AirPods. If I just kind of clean out the outside of the wax, I'm good. But you forget that it can still get within the actual hearing aid itself.
Absolutely. And I really hesitate to advise anybody to even try to clean the wax out of that, because especially if you're dealing with a receiver in the canal hearing aid, the most popular type of hearing aid, if you're sticking something into that hole, that receiver is pretty sensitive and it's very likely you're going to pop right through there.
Got it.
So, yep, it's just as easy as taking it off, putting a new one on. But that's the benefit of seeing an audiologist who can really get into the nitty gritty of what are the components of a hearing aid.
Yeah.
Because if it was like an AirPod and you just bought them and took them home, it's kind of up to you to figure out.
Yeah. And so I know the smaller ones, the in the ear canal, they don't have a tube, but over the ear does have the tube. Does the tube just house wires, protect wires, or what is that tube there for? And if I owned hearing aids, could I ever be trusted to do anything with that tube if presented with an opportunity?
Well, as it applies to you, probably
me
knowing
specifically.
you specifically, yeah. I don't know if we could trust
smart.
you with it.
That's the smart answer. Don't touch the tube, Kevin.
Or just like hearing aids in general.
Fair.
So,
yeah.
But
that's why I know you.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
what you have me for.
Yeah.
But it's a really good question. So the tube, so there are different types of behind the ear hearing aids. Sometimes it is genuinely just a tube that goes down either to a dome or most likely a custom earpiece. And the tube is what carries the sound.
Got it.
In other devices like the receiver in the canal, where that receiver piece is actually in your ear canal, that's when there's a wire encased in the tube.
Got it. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it does make sense to me, even though I don't know anything about what we're talking about. I mean, like I know clearly, I mean, like obviously I've already established, like I know 3 elements about what we're talking about, more like 2.5, but that makes sense to me in my brain, not really understanding that these things that are in and around my ears are amplifying sound. And it's my job to make sure that they continue to do so.
Yes.
Based on not knowing what the technology is of itself.
Yes.
So here's my final question for you. There are speakers in hearing aids, right?
Yes.
And like how small are those speakers?
So speaker could also be called receiver.
Okay.
So those are one and the same.
Got it. Okay. So I'm just taking my own terminology and putting it in there. But seriously, like how big would a speaker in a hearing aid be?
They're tiny.
A receiver rather. Sorry, I'm
truly.
educated now.
Like if you think of putting something in your ear canal to begin with is really small.
Totally.
Right. And so the receiver's got to be really, really small in order to fit into your ear along with the dome or whatever piece is on the end. You've seen modern hearing aids. They are tiny, tiny, tiny.
Crazy.
Yeah. So the speakers, the microphones, the processors are all tiny components that really need to be taken care of.
Awesome. And now that you're all a little wiser, including myself, we can't help but feel we've done our good deed for the day in disseminating some information for the greater good of humanity. And so thanks again to Dr. McMahon for her article. And if you want to learn more about hearing aids, please go to askanaudiologist.com for all of your audiological information needs. Dr. Ali, thank you as always.
Thank you.
And that is going to do it for this episode of Ask an Audiologist. We thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you next week.
You can find more information at askanaudiologist.com, and you can follow us on all our social channels at Ask an Audiologist. The information provided on this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and does not substitute for professional medical advice.
It's 4. Do we have time for an implant?
No.
Got it.
Absolutely not. And you wouldn't want me doing that anyway.
Sure. And you wouldn't want me doing that either.